You'll just have to ignore the construction sounds at the back. It's really annoying. Hello and welcome to another video. This video is titled Padhne ke Baad, which is supposed to be the book version of Dekhne ke Baad. We're going to talk about a book which is called Remnants of A Separation by Aanchal Malhotra. It is a book about, as it says, a history of partition through material memory. This video is not just a book review, it's more me using this book to talk about an issue or an idea that's been on my mind for a while, and that's also, I think, has a lot of importance in today's times. First, let me tell you about the book. Remnants of a Separation is basically 21 personal accounts of people who have been through partition, and basically it's about how they have endured partition and what remains they have taken with them. Each chapter starts with a picture of the item that they've carried across the border, and it's 21 accounts. It ranges from people who have fled from what is now Pakistan to India, from what is now India to Pakistan. There's the perspective of a soldier, there's a perspective of a British officer. What makes the basis of this book is what you identify with and where you come from. Her writing is very nice, it's very engaging, it's deeply emotional. There are multiple times while reading this that I got a little teary-eyed, I have to admit. This book questions one very basic piece of our identity, which although sounds very profound and very pretentious, but it kind of questions what it even means to be Indian, because there are multiple accounts where people have fled the border and have lived in a country that is not India but has still a strong connection to the country. They've still felt that, this is still my home. I told her the two things that reminded me of home, of India, were both smells, he said with a distant look in his eyes. The first is the scent of geeli mitti, earth after it had been watered by the Mali, or even better, after it had rained. Geeli mitti. I felt its essence inside my being. The very smell the Englishman had evoked. The very smell we were both so far away from at that moment. And the second thing I remember is the smell of my father's leather boots when he'd come home from work in D.I. Khan. The mustiness of leather mixed with earth and sweat and heat and the fatigue of the day. That smell, that particularly Indian smell, is unforgettable. And when I say India, in this context, I don't mean India with borders. I mean Hindustan. All Indians and Pakistanis know what partition was, but only theoretically, and this book delves into the brutal reality, which is jarring and it's scary and it's confusing because you can't understand how someone can go through that. I spoke to you about the psyche of a soldier when on the battlefield. How during wartime, we fired at the same men with whom we'd later share cups of chai. That was war. That was what war was like. It bound you to your duty. There was no room for emotions. The trench became your life, your honor, your vow. You obeyed it. You were trained to obey. But off the battlefield, you must realize that things were different. Relationships were different. To be honest, relationships, especially those between Hindu, Muslim and Sikh soldiers who had fought together before independence and had to fight against each other during and after it, those relationships are very difficult to explain or be understood by those who were not there at the time. And it makes you question the presence of that border itself, how a lot of stories begin with, I thought that where I lived would fall into Pakistan or would fall into India for these reasons. But when the border was drawn, it didn't make sense. How could I have landed up on this side and how could I have landed up on that side? And how randomly Radcliffe had drawn it. It was like he placed a pen, sneezed, and then his hand just kind of scribbled something on the page and he's like, ye border hai, you have to make do with this. Therefore, through these stories of loss, wandering, a search for identity, you begin to question what this definition of nationalism even is. This book itself, 21 stories and therefore 21 different definitions of nationalism. Our Hindu brothers, he began, are born in Hindustan. They grow up here, live their lives here, they die here. And when they die, they are cremated and their ashes are immersed into holy waters of the river Ganga. Within her tides they flow, even if it is eventually into foreign waters. But look at us Muslims. We are born in Hindustan. We grow up here. We live here. And we die here. And when we die, we are buried deep into the ground. And eventually, when our bodies decompose, we become one with the land. We become Hindustan. And that is profound if you think about it. And not once through the book has the author put her sense of nationalism and definition of nationalism to dilute the definition of the people she's interviewing. And that's important in a day and age where we're all sort of being geared towards following only one sense of nationalism, believing in only one sense of nationalism, believing that one definition is the only way and the correct way of showing that you're patriotic. This book feels somewhat anti-national to even read. Tell me, beta, weren't Muslims also born here? Isn't this our country too? Don't we have the right to live here, where we were born, where we grew up? Aren't we part of this soil? My father told us that this was meant to be a secular India, but I'm losing that vision now. He used to paint a beautiful picture for us, and we believed it. But now I think perhaps that was not the truth at all, just something we had wanted to believe. For, till today, something new always continues to disturb this land. I think those quotes perfectly summed up not just what I wanted to say, but also, for me, is a peaceful resolution to what's been happening in the country of late. Whether it's the bloating definition of nationalism that's being convoluted and forced down our throats, or the Pulwama attack, or when our social fabric is being tainted at a time when our social fabric is being not just tainted, ripped apart. I don't know, this book reminds you of things, and it makes you think, and it makes you question things that you've always been known, that you've always believed. And at this point in time, especially at this point in time, it's important to remember these things. I've been seeing these pictures of various activists, farmers, people who have been lynched, killed, shot during the reign, the government which is currently in power. And below it there's a caption that says, remember me when you vote. Yeah, I guess that's it. Remember them when you vote. I don't know, just be aware of what's happening around. Question it, don't accept it on face value. Even if you believe it, even if you think that what's happening is right, question it nonetheless. I think that's important. I hope it made sense. So like, share and subscribe, and I will see you next Sunday. This one was an important one. I've been wanting to get it off my chest, but I just didn't know the right way to do it. And I think this book gave me the right way to do it. If you want to borrow it, let me know. Okay.